Okay, so thank you for joining me, Kathy. And I want to start out by saying that I am not a mental health professional, but I have um, about 15 years experience working with marginalized folks, people who have experienced trauma, 5 of those years at Literacy Pittsburgh. And especially over the past, 3 to 5 with things that are happening in the world and our access to them, through our phones, through the 24-hour news cycle, and then in person with our students and our clients at Literacy Pittsburgh. It's compassion fatigue and taking care of myself and helping our volunteer tutors to take care of themselves has been something that I've been thinking a lot about more about. And I have been given some resources and I've done some reading, and I have sources that I have at the end of this presentation. And then I also have, I can provide um, books and things that a friend who is in the mental health profession uh, lent me to work on this that were really great. And it was kind of like really nice to feel like what I've been feeling, the helplessness and the fatigue and the exhaustion, um, is a real thing and is studied by professionals instead of just me not rising to the task, is how it felt like to me. So, all right. So this is the blurb that I sent out. I just wanted to put it back up there, half as a reminder about what this tutor talk is about, and half to, just to review. And it's about working with traumatized and marginalized communities, how you can recognize the signs of compassion fatigue in yourself and in others, and then also talking about things that you can do. These are things that I've taken from professionals and personal things too, so that have helped me. Okay, trauma. This is a real diagnosis. Well, the real diagnosis is PTSD, and that's something that they first started studying with veterans of wars. I mean, I think that's what we all think about first, are, folks who have been in combat and come home and, a door slamming or a siren, something like that sets them off into like a panic attack or a freeze mode and things like that. And that's extreme, but trauma can be caused by so many things that you see on the news every day, things that have happened to you. It's anything that's stressful or terrifying. You can be in it or you can witness it. You can be in the car for an accident or you can see it happening on the highway. And that can really affect you. I mean, I know they recently put a stop sign at an intersection near my house, but up until then, there were accidents almost all the time. And just hearing them and then seeing the people getting out of the car and upset, and the emergency services people coming. I mean, it's awful. I mean, it's not me, but I'm watching it happen to other people and I sympathize with them, and things like that. And then of course, we watch the news and we see on social media the suffering of people all around the world. And if you think back like 20 years ago or more, we just didn't have that access. Even if you watch the news every night, that's 30 minutes, an hour of your time, or you read the paper and things like that. Now it's like you open up your phone and you can see, a starving child at your fingertips, or people in refugee camps, or in war zones, and things that are similar just in our own neighborhoods. So there are a lot of different ways to, I mean, there's as many different ways to experience and process trauma as there are stars in the sky. Some people are very resilient and they can use that to strengthen themselves in some ways. And for other people, they just never quite are the same. Um, Other examples of things that can cause trauma that are less obvious are like extreme poverty, living day to day, not knowing, you know, where your next meal is going to come from, or if your electricity is going to get turned off, or you're going to get evicted, or your car is going to be repossessed. Like that is like continuous hit to your nervous system and your emotions and your brain. And I mean, a lot of our folks that we serve are in this category. Also, one thing that's talked about a lot with children, but then children become adults, so are something called ACEs, and that stands for Adverse Childhood Experiences. And I feel like it's a very 20th century thing to say, oh, kids are resilient, they'll get over it, they'll forget about it. But they're finding more and more over the past 25, 30 years that things that happen in childhood can actually change the way your brain functions. And so when you have children in school or teenagers who act out a lot of that can be from or caused by things that happened to them in their childhood. And maybe they are in a safe place now. They're with, a foster family, or they're, things have changed for them, but that still they have this completely subconscious reaction to different things that they probably aren't even aware of. And, those children, adolescents grow into adults. So these are the kind of things that I think about a lot when interacting with our students at Literacy Pittsburgh. Like when a student is avoiding me, not texting me back or not messaging me back, or seems to be uninterested, or is always forgetting, what we talked about last time. I mean, there are things that, may be going on with them biologically that, I make sure that I've told myself many times it's not personal. So, it's not about me. There's a lot going on, and, yes, they are adults and they should, be responsible, but there's a lot going on inside their bodies and their brains that they may not even have control of, or they may not be aware of. So
with my students, each of them has their life here relatively under control, and they're managing it fairly well. It's difficult, it's hard, but a lot of what I see with them is the pain of what's going on back home.
yes.
And the mothers, the fathers, the sisters, the daughter, the grandchild, these people that they're separated from, and they just can never turn their face to life here. And
Yeah.
I, it it's
So
hard because
it's
that's very real, and they speak to them
yeah,
every day,
yeah.
all day sometimes. I mean,
So
they
they're
connect.
probably experiencing like vicarious trauma,
Yeah,
survivor's guilt,
yes,
things
yes.
like that.
It really
And
covers everything.
yeah, and probably compassion fatigue also. So these are some signs of trauma that I pulled from a very large document that I have found. I think it was on the National Institutes of Health, the government website, and it was just endless. It was like 2 pages and boxes, and there were, just different kind of versions of like immediate response and ongoing and things like that. I pulled out things that I felt like were maybe more likely to be something that we would see with our students because we aren't working in ER, so we're not going to be dealing with like somebody who's just been brought in from an accident or something like that. So these are, some things that we can see, and like something that stood out to me was lower resistance to colds and infection and long-term health effects. Like I've definitely heard, oh, student just gets sick so much. And then I saw this and I thought, wow, it's because their immune system is, it's affected by trauma. Something I had never thought about. The fatigue, self-blame, difficulty making decisions, emotional detachment. I don't know, you said that you noticed like the constant anxiety of your students, Kathy.
One of my students, well, both of them, their ability to stay in the United States is in question.
Yeah.
And we had a very tearful time a couple weeks ago because one of the women said, I can't go back because I was always sick
Mm,
because of my friends who are in prison and separated from their children, and the stories she told that were just so, she never talked about that before.
yeah.
She just wept and said, I can't go back, but because I was always sick. That's
Yeah.
what she
Yeah.
told me.
The emotional effect
Mm.
it is literally affecting her physically. Mm. Okay. So marginalized communities, I mean, it covers a really wide swath of humans everywhere.
Mhm.
Um, Anybody who experiences social, economic, political exclusion, discrimination based on race, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, class, disabilities, the neurological kind, or differences, or physical, and religion, and I'm sure that we can come up with examples of any of that, but I don't know if there's any student that we serve at Literacy Pittsburgh that doesn't experience some sort of discrimination or,
Mhm.
oppression, whether they're born here or not. Uh, so those are the folks we're working with. And sometimes just being a part of one of these communities can press on the trauma, press on the effect of the anxiety and the stress. So, compassion fatigue. So this, I read about the history of this is that they started noticing in nurses about 30 years ago this certain brand of burnout, but they were like, but it's not burnout like you would think of as somebody who goes to an office every day, at a corporation, that kind of thing where you're tired of your job and things like this. There's something extra about the way these nurses are feeling and seeing people in pain and suffering and their families and things like that every day. So that's when they started to do the research based around them. And it's burnout in the way that we all know it, but it has a lot to do with the emotional pain coming from the desire to help relieve the suffering of others. And it's something that, nurses and teachers and social workers, firefighters, we all, but, you know, I think of it like those are helping professionals, but I honestly think it could be anybody at this point because we see it all every day. I mean, how many times have I sent $50 to somebody's GoFundMe after seeing a story about, something on social media, and I'm just like, oh my God, this poor family, and then I send it, and it's like, I am wanting to care for, to help in some way, but all I can give is $50. So then you think, well, what is $50 to somebody whose house burned down and they lost everything? And that's a lot of where the compassion fatigue comes from, because you think I'm doing the best I can, but it doesn't feel like enough. And like, you spend a few hours with your students every week, but it probably doesn't feel like enough because they have these huge problems. And what can you do? What can any of us do? Uh, but
Well, I got up at 4 o'clock in the morning and drove one of my students to the airport.
yeah,
She
I
was
mean,
so anxious about going through the TSA line by herself. And I said, you have everything you need.
yeah,
She said, I want you next to me. Will you just, of course. So
yeah,
there we,
yeah.
there we were. And
And
it
then
was
you find yourself
fine.
doing,
But
yeah,
I think she was expecting that someone would hear her accent or see how she looked and decide that she couldn't go. And
I don't blame her. I mean,
yeah, no, I totally understand.
yeah,
So we just did it together.
well, that's wonderful.
But then it's not enough.
Yeah,
I like the way you use that word, enough. It's
yeah.
because there's not.
It's never going to be enough unless you have some amazing amount of resources. You can buy somebody a new home after their house burns down, but how many of us can do that?
And the people that can don't. So
Yeah, exactly. I wasn't
story
gonna
for
say
another day.
no. I wasn't gonna say that, but I'm glad you did because I was thinking. Okay. So we kind of already touched on that. Who gets compassion fatigue? Helpers, but also, volunteers, and I think really anybody at this point. So
I I I have friends who have compassion fatigue as parents of adult children who are struggling.
yeah, yeah.
Very real.
I see it with people I know who were very engaged last fall, with the election, with things going on in the world, and then have kind of just disengaged from a lot of that in the past several months because they feel just exhausted and defeated, and they're going to take a break from social media. I'm not going to watch the news anymore. I just can't. And I mean, they aren't working in any of these industries. They aren't volunteering. They just have felt like they've come to the end of what they can give emotionally or financially, or their time. And it's a shame. And I I believe that people come back from it. I think of it as like a break.
I hope so.
Yeah. So, okay. Signs of compassion fatigue. These are just a few. I mean, there's lots. And feelings of helplessness and powerless in the face of suffering of trauma. We all feel that. If we don't, but I'm sure there are people who don't. There are people who just turn away or feel like that's not my problem. So it's good to have people like you, Kathy. A decline in the ability to feel empathy, sensitivity, and pity. I see it in myself. Um, Whereas I would go above and beyond, a couple of years ago to make something work for a student, I sometimes find myself saying, I just don't know if it's going to work right now. And I think, am I not caring as much? What's happened? Have I just seen this happen so many times now that I know it's not going to work? Things like that. But I think in a lot of it is just compassion fatigue, and I can only do so much. So feeling overwhelmed, exhausted, physically and spiritually, I think that's important.
Yes.
And feeling detached, numb, and emotionally disconnected. And that was what I had mentioned before about someone who's no longer with us who had been a caseworker and said that she doesn't feel anything anymore. And I think that happens a lot with folks who are like social workers and things like that, where it's kind of like a self-protecting thing where they become totally numb, even if there's something tragic happening right in front of them.
I very definitely feel the first and the third.
Yeah.
The second and the fourth haven't got that far yet.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Well, I
even
hope you don't.
even even going to that day on Saturday, um, and knowing there were other people that felt similar things, and hearing the good and the bad stories from other tutors, and that was very helpful.
It really does help. I mean, just researching for this and realizing that there's whole huge groups of people that were experiencing this to the point where like scientists stepped in to research it. I think, okay, well, I'm not the first, I'm not the last, I'm not the only.
Mhm.
That helps a lot. Okay. So these are some things that I found out there
Mm.
that helped me to think about it in a different way. And there was also something that I we talked about last night at the training I'm doing for the other position. And we are talking about children there, and we were talking about the adverse childhood experiences and how that can change the biology of a child's brain and nervous system. And I asked the question, what if the child is changed physically, how can we help just by spending a couple hours a week? How can we change it? And we came up with the metaphor of like the scales. And so, if the adverse childhood experiences kind of takes the child down into trauma and stress and pain, what you can put on the other side are what's called benevolent experiences. The more they found that, whatever terrible thing or things happen to a child in their childhood, if they have enough good memories, a best friend or loving to draw or a grandma who, they spent every Sunday with, that actually helps to even out or even outweigh, the terrible things that happen to them. And so I think of that now like, well, I can't help this person turn their life around, but if I spend a couple hours a week with them, then maybe that's enough to tip the scale, a little bit further away from despair, you know, and all those
Yeah.
things. So compassion satisfaction was a phrase that I liked a lot, instead of compassion
Yeah.
fatigue. And
Hmm.
it's something you do have to actively work on to increase your awareness of the hope, the joys, the rewards, the sense of meaning and purpose. That doesn't mean like you're sitting with your students and they're upset, being like, oh, everything's gonna be okay. Like it's definitely not, but just maybe you talked about something afterwards that, she was excited about or happy about, um, or just knowing that you were there to, that she trusts you enough to share those stories with you now. I mean, that's a good step. That's
Mhm.
something you can focus on, knowing that there's more trust there than there was before.
I feel very grateful that the women that I work with are very appreciative, and they do make me feel appreciated
Yeah.
in their dear sweet ways. And
Yeah. I always feel like our students are like, they've experienced a lot of terrible things, many of them, and are struggling still. And they're often like some of the most kind and generous people that I've ever met,
they're
even through all
both
these terrible things.
both of them have mothers in other countries, and one of them in danger. And they brought me Mother's Day gifts.
Oh, that's so
I mean,
sweet. I
completely
know.
unexpected, but so yeah.
Yeah, I
Yes.
had a student for a while and our areas adjusted. She's with Miranda now, actually, that she was at home without a car with a young child for a while. So I would, when she needed to test, I would bring her a testing iPad because she was on a taking a reading test. And I would come thinking I was just stopping by to drop off this iPad, and she'd invite me in, and there'd be this huge spread of food. And
Oh,
here she is, she's not working. Her husband's working for DoorDash. They're in a small apartment with two young children. And I'm thinking, like,
yeah.
like, you don't have to feed me. Like, please don't. But she was so happy to welcome me in and share
Oh,
her food with me. And I
that's-
eventually had to make plan for it because there was no getting out of it. So I had to like make sure I had an extra hour onto that stop by. And I
oh,
loved it. I mean, she was lonely, she's at home with a 3 year
sure.
old and her husband is working. And so it felt good.
Yeah.
Um,
So along with the fatigue, there is definitely satisfaction.
yeah. Or, joy even. So yeah, and focus on the parts of the relationship with your students and savor the wins. I mean, even if it's just like you talked about how to, you know, go to the grocery store last week and the next time you meet this week, they say, I was there and I remembered, I remembered how we talked about
Mhm.
the checkout or, the cashier. But
Mhm.
that's a win. That's
Yeah.
huge. I love hearing those things. Um, there was a young Sudanese mom who took a computer class last fall, and she works at Amazon warehouse, and she had no computer skills. So we put her in a beginning computer, and I saw her, and she said, I was able to do all of the things I needed to do at work on the computer without having to ask. I'm assuming it's clocking in and things like that, without having to ask anybody. I was like, that's huge, you
Mhm.
know?
Sure.
So, I mean, a lot of this stuff are things we take for granted. So, yeah. So, yeah, I spend a lot of time focusing on the wins because there are the students that you meet and you have high hopes for, and then they just disappear. They meet with their tutor, come to class a couple times, and then disappear, or something happens and they can't come anymore, and that's
No,
always
yeah.
disappointing. Yeah. Are your two students now the first students that you've worked with?
Uh, About 10, 11 years ago, when I was still working full time, I had one student that I just saw once a week, but she was very advanced
Oh,
and
yeah.
wanted to improve her written skills. Needed some help navigating the school district and understanding the communication from them, but she had a good job and her husband was well employed and um, they rented a lovely home and had a car and
Yeah. Yeah.
it was very different.
Yeah.
It was on a
Yeah.
whole different level. We were learning difficult vocabulary and you know this
There's
this, this
definitely like,
we started over a year ago with nothing.
yeah.
I mean we hello.
Yeah. There are a lot of wins with working with really low level
Oh,
students.
they've come so far.
Yeah.
They've come
Yeah.
so far. And the fact that now if I leave the room to go get a book or use the restroom, I come back and I stand outside and they're actually talking to one another.
So they
And
don't have the same first language.
no,
Oh,
no,
that's great.
no, no.
Yeah, that's
And
great.
it's like, oh, oh.
Yeah.
So,
That's another thing that I love to focus on is seeing students form friendships with each other. Because that's one of the biggest things when I meet new people who are new to the country. They say, I don't know anybody. I don't have any friends here. My family's back home. And, over time, if they're coming to a class or in a group, um, they they become friends with people. And I
mhm,
love that.
mhm.
So, these are people that they might be friends with for the rest of their lives, and you're helping to facilitate that.
I hope.
Yeah.
I hope
See,
they, I hope they
every,
don't have to leave. That's the
Well, that's one of those things that it's out of our
out of our
hands.
hands.
So we can only hope for the best. And one thing that in January we had an all staff retreat, and we had some folks from other organizations come and do a panel with us at one point. And I think her name is Anna Maria. She's the head of Latino Community Center, and she said some things that really resonated with me. One being that it's a marathon, not a sprint. That, if you allow the news cycle and all those things to overwhelm you, who's going to be around to help folks 4 years from now? you
Mhm.
know? And another thing she said was, deportations are going to happen. They've always happened. We see them more now because it's part of what the people in the current administration want us to see and to believe is happening. But that the relationships and the friendships that you build with your students, those will be something that they remember and cherish no matter where they are. That was really nice to hear because, I have experienced two young men in a class that I administer being detained. And it felt kind of like they were just disappeared and, didn't know where they were and things like that. But
Mm.
uh, yeah, just knowing that. And maybe, with social media and everything, they're out there somewhere and maybe you'll reconnect if the worst happens, but hopefully it won't. So those were things that she said and that helped me a lot. Just give yourself grace. And I like to think about the what is it, the scale a lot. Like, your time with them helps to tip things to the good. Wow. So access, nurture, and support, things that you can do. You're doing right now. We're chatting about things. So we have the gather and gabs, which are the networking with the tutors, tutor talks, your program coordinator. Miranda's awesome. Um, and then, yeah, I sometimes, I don't know about you, but I don't talk to my family and friends a whole lot about the things that are going on because sometimes it just seems like they don't understand.
No, I
I did, I put online groups, but I didn't have a chance to really look it up.
I don't, that's not a thing.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, I follow on social media like our local organizations like Casa San Jose and JFCS and some more national ones like the National Institute for it's like a legal like immigration legal services and and they post things, but I don't have like a outside of Literacy Pittsburgh group either. And yeah, engage in reflective practice and mindfulness. I mean, that's an individual thing. I try to read every night before I go to sleep. I take walks, that kind of stuff, whatever you do to disconnect from the world and spend some time.
I have I have noticed, and I'm trying to figure it out how to handle it. It's that I have being fairly newly retired and having other retired friends, and I sometimes pull back and think I I have other things to think about and plan for than to just activity after activity that's just kind of for me.
Yeah.
And I and I don't want to be judgmental because each person has to use their time the way that they want to. And so I'm working on that. And I think I kind of share what you said. I don't talk about it that much because I am very proud that I do this because it feels so, um, like it's,
Meaningful.
yeah, it's really doing something.
Yeah.
And I see a change in them and, but I don't want to make other people, I don't know. It's been kind of a line to walk, and I think being more quiet about it is better. And you know, I don't do things on Mondays and Thursdays mornings
Yeah.
because that's when I tutor, and I won't change that. And
I have been,
they're getting the hint, but
yeah, I understand that completely. I mean, most my friends are mostly still working, but my parents retired about 5 years ago, and since the pandemic has officially been over the past couple years, they are exactly the same. I mean, they're almost busier than I am.
mhm,
And I have a full-time job, but it's all running errands, having appointments, going to lunch with friends, exactly what you said. And it's like,
yeah,
yes, they worked for, 45 years or whatever, and they deserve to have their time. But at the same time, it's the same thing. I want to be like, can't you just make time for 2 days a week kind of a thing? But
no, I no. So
yeah, it
that's
is.
why getting together on Saturday or meeting with Miranda, just knowing there are other people out there doing that is really helpful to me. So
Yeah.
thank you for this today, even.
Yeah, I've enjoyed it. I was glad to see your face because I was going to do this just with myself.
And it still would have been good.
Yeah, well, hopefully other people will, once it gets loaded to the YouTube channel, people will access it and it can be useful to them too. Things that you've said as well. All right, I'm gonna
We kind of did that along the way.
yeah, that's what I was thinking.